Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The knot in my stomach had been a resident companion for a week, ever since Mark, my husband of 22 years, came home practically vibrating with excitement. He'd landed a huge promotion, Senior Vice President at Sterling Corp. I was thrilled for him, of course. He'd worked tirelessly for this, long nights, weekends sacrificed. What I wasn't thrilled about, what had invited this persistent dread, was the upcoming company dinner to welcome the new CEO. Mark had casually mentioned his name, Julian Vance, and the world had tilted on its axis. Julian Vance, my Julian. Or, more accurately, the Julian I'd loved with the fierce, all-consuming passion of youth, the one who had shattered my heart into a million pieces when he'd left for a job overseas, promising to send for me. And then, silence. Now, 25 years later, he was back, not just in the same city, but as my husband's boss. The irony wasn't just bitter. It was a cruel, cosmic joke. I'd spent days wrestling with whether to tell Mark. In the end, I hadn't. What good would it do? It was ancient history, a lifetime ago. Or so I told myself, trying to ignore the tremor in my hands every time I thought of facing Julian again. The evening of the dinner arrived cloaked in a humid summer stickiness that mirrored my own inner discomfort. Our home, usually a sanctuary of calm with its soft lamplight and the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books, felt like a way station on the road to an inevitable confrontation. I fussed with my dress, a deep sapphire silk that Mark said made my eyes look like the evening sky. He was already downstairs, his cheerful whistling a stark contrast to the frantic jazz solo playing in my chest. "Eleanor, honey, you ready? The sitter's here for Leo, and we should get going," Mark called up. Leo, our golden retriever, our furry, four-legged child, whined softly from his spot on the landing, as if sensing my unease. "Coming, Mark," I managed, my voice sounding surprisingly normal. I took one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back was 48, lines of laughter and worry etched around her eyes, her dark hair, once a wild tumble, now tamed into a respectable shoulder-length style. She looked like a wife, a mother, to Leo at least, a woman settled in her life. She did not look like someone whose past was about to detonate in her present. The restaurant, the Gilded Spoon, was the kind of place that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. Low lighting, heavy silverware, and the hushed murmur of important conversations. Mark, bless his oblivious heart, was beaming, already shaking hands and making introductions. I scanned the room, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. And then I saw him. Julian Vance. He stood near the grand fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, listening intently to a group of men. Time had been kind to him, annoyingly so. The lean, almost boyish frame I remembered had broadened, filled out. His hair, once jet black, was now distinguished with threads of silver at the temples, lending him an air of authority that was undeniably compelling. He laughed at something someone said, and the sound, deeper than I remembered, sent an unwelcome shiver down my spine. He hadn't seen me yet. Mark, spotting him, grabbed my elbow. "There he is, Elle. Come on, I want you to meet Julian." My feet felt like lead blocks. This was it. No escape. As we approached, Julian turned, his eyes sweeping over Mark and then, finally, landing on me. For a fraction of a second, his polite corporate smile faltered. Recognition flickered in those dark, intelligent eyes that had once memorized every inch of me. It was a fleeting thing, quickly masked, but I saw it. And I knew he saw it in me, too. "Julian," Mark said, his voice full of genuine admiration, This is my wife, Eleanor. Eleanor, this is Julian Vance, our new CEO. Julian extended his hand, his gaze holding mine. Eleanor, he said, his voice a low rumble that I remembered all too well. It's a genuine pleasure to meet you. Mark speaks very highly of you. His handshake was firm, warm, lingering perhaps a breath too long. Or maybe that was just my heightened senses. Mr. Vance, I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray the storm raging inside me. Welcome to the company. Mark has been so excited about your vision. Small talk ensued, a polite dance of words over the chasm of our shared past. I watched him, the way he commanded attention effortlessly, the way his smile, now carefully curated, didn't quite reach his eyes when he looked at me. Mark, oblivious, chatted animatedly about quarterly reports and market expansion, while I felt like I was suffocating. Later, as dinner progressed, a lavish affair with too many courses and even more forced pleasantries, I found myself seated across from Julian. Mark was engaged in an earnest conversation with the CFO's wife to my right. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to recede, and it was just Julian and me, a bubble of unspoken history surrounding us. He leaned forward slightly, his voice pitched low, for my ears only. You haven't changed much, Ellie. Ellie. No one had called me that in decades. It was a name reserved for a past I had buried deep. You have Julian, I said, my voice equally quiet. CEO suits you. A ghost of a smile played on his lips. Life takes us on unexpected journeys, doesn't it? He paused, his gaze intense. Mark is a good man. Talented. He's lucky to have you. Was that a compliment or something else? Before I could decipher the undercurrent, he continued, I was looking through some old files, personnel reviews, that sort of thing. Interesting what you can find. My blood ran cold. What was he implying? Mark's predecessor, a fellow named Henderson, seemed to have a rather unique way of managing his expense accounts, especially concerning certain client entertainment that never quite made it to the official reports. My fork clattered softly against my plate. Henderson had been Mark's direct boss for years before retiring. If there were irregularities and Mark was seen as his protege, I'm not sure I understand, Mr. Vance, I said, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. Julian's eyes met mine, and there was no warmth in them now, only a cool, calculating assessment. Oh, I think you do, Eleanor. Some things, if they came to light, could be rather damaging to an up-and-coming senior vice president's career, especially one who might have, even unknowingly, benefited from such creativity. He took a slow sip of his wine. We should talk. Privately. There's an old coffee shop on Elm Street, the Daily Grind. Do you remember it? Thursday, 10 a.m. It wasn't a question. It was a summons. The Daily Grind. It was where we used to meet, tucked away in a quiet corner, sharing dreams and coffee. Now it was to be the setting for... What? Blackmail? My ex-lover, the boy who had sworn eternal love, was now a powerful man threatening my husband's career, using our shared past as leverage. The dread that had been my companion all week solidified into a cold, hard stone in my chest. The vibrant chatter of the restaurant faded to a dull roar. Mark laughed beside me, blissfully unaware that our carefully constructed life was teetering on the edge of a precipice, pushed there by a ghost from my past. The air in our little house, usually so comforting, felt heavy when Mark and I returned later that night. He was still buoyant from the dinner, recounting conversations, talking about Julian's impressive grasp of the industry. He's really going to shake things up, Elle, in a good way. And he seemed to like you. Said you were charming. Mark kissed my temple, his arm around my waist as we stood in the hallway. This promotion, this new CEO, it feels like a fresh start for us, doesn't it? I forced a smile. It does, honey. It really does. But as I lay in bed that night, long after Mark's steady breathing filled the room, sleep was a distant shore. My mind raced, replaying every glance, every word Julian had uttered. The subtle shift in his tone, the cold calculation in his eyes when he'd mentioned Henderson and the expense accounts. This wasn't just an awkward reunion. It was a threat, veiled but unmistakable. He was using our past, the intimacy we once shared, as a weapon against me, against Mark. The unexpected journey he'd spoken of had led him here, to a position of power over me, and he was clearly not afraid to use it. The warmth of Julian, the boy I'd loved, was gone, replaced by Mr. Vance, the CEO, a man who seemed to delight in this cruel twist of fate. And I had to meet him. I had to know what he wanted, how far he was willing to go. The thought of Thursday morning at the daily grind filled me with a nauseating mixture of fear and a strange, unwelcome flicker of something else, something I didn't dare name. The next few days passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I made Mark his favorite breakfasts, walked Leo in the park, even managed a reasonably cheerful phone call with my sister. But beneath the surface, a current of anxiety pulled at me relentlessly. Every time Mark mentioned Julian's name, which was often praising his decisiveness or his strategic thinking, I felt a fresh wave of nausea. How could this be happening? How could the man I once shared my deepest secrets and dreams with now be the one poised to destroy everything I held dear? I replayed our last months together, all those years ago. The passion, yes, but also the arguments, the growing sense of unease as his ambition began to overshadow everything else. He'd always been driven, fiercely intelligent, but there was a ruthlessness there too, a trait I'd naively overlooked, blinded by love. When he left for that job in Singapore, he promised it was temporary, just a stepping stone. He'd paint a beautiful picture of our future, me joining him, a life of adventure. The letters came frequently at first, filled with exotic descriptions and protestations of love. Then they dwindled, became less personal, more about his successes. And then nothing. Just a vast, echoing silence that had slowly, painfully taught me to move on. I'd rebuilt my life, brick by brick, with Mark, a man whose kindness and steadfastness were the antithesis of Julian's volatile brilliance. Our life wasn't a whirlwind of passion, perhaps, but it was steady, comfortable, and deeply loving. A life I would protect at any cost. Wednesday evening, Mark came home looking troubled. "Strange day at work," he said, loosening his tie as he sat down at the kitchen island where I was chopping vegetables for dinner. "Oh, what happened?" I asked, trying to sound casual, my heart skipping a beat. Julian, Mr. Vance, called me into his office. Asked a lot of questions about Henderson, about how he managed his team, his budgets. It was odd, almost like he was digging for something. Mark frowned, rubbing his temples. Made me a bit uncomfortable, to be honest. Henderson was a good boss, a bit old school maybe, but always fair to me. My knife stilled. So Julian wasn't just making vague threats to me. He was already probing, laying the groundwork. The cold stone in my chest grew heavier. Maybe he's just trying to understand the company culture, the history. I offered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. Mark shrugged. Yeah, maybe. Still, it felt pointed. He looked at me, his brow furrowed with a slight worry that hadn't been there before. "You okay? Elle, you've seemed a bit quiet lately." "Just a little tired, that's all," I said, forcing another smile. This new schedule of yours, all this excitement, it's a lot to take in. I leaned over and kissed him. But I'm so proud of you. Remember that. He smiled then, the worry lines softening. Thanks, honey. Means a lot. But his words echoed in my mind. It felt pointed. Julian was a man who did nothing without a reason. He was strategically applying pressure, and my meeting with him tomorrow was clearly the next step in his plan. What did he want from me? Money? Unlikely he was a CEO. Information? Influence over Mark? Or was this something far more personal, a twisted game to reassert control, to unravel the life I had built without him? The thought sent a chill through me, colder than any winter wind. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough, and yet I dreaded it with every fiber of my being. The daily grind, once a haven of whispered confessions and shared laughter, was about to become a battleground. And I had no idea what weapons Julian possessed or how devastating they might be. Thursday morning dawned gray and overcast, the sky a perfect reflection of my mood. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple blouse and tailored trousers, wanting to project an image of calm confidence I was far from feeling. As I drove towards Elm Street, memories assailed me. Julian laughing, his head thrown back, sunlight catching the highlights in his dark hair as we sat at our usual table by the window of the daily grind. Julian tracing the lines on my palm, telling me our futures were intertwined. Julian, his eyes intense, promising he'd never let me go. How could that boy have become this man, a harbinger of fear in my life? The daily grind looked much the same as it had all those years ago. The familiar scent of roasted coffee beans and old newspapers wrapped around me like a ghostly embrace as I stepped inside. It was relatively empty at this mid-morning hour. And there he was, seated at a small table in the back, not our old window seat, thankfully. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his forearms, a stark contrast to the casual student he'd been when we last frequented this place. "Eleanor," he said, his voice even cool. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Thank you for coming." I didn't have much of a choice, did I? I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. I sat down, placing my purse firmly on my lap, a small barrier between us. A waiter approached, and Julian ordered a black coffee. I asked for tea, needing something to steady my nerves. Once the waiter retreated, a tense silence settled between us. I decided to break it. "All right, Julian, you have my attention. You've made vague threats about Mark's career, dredged up the past. What is it you want?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me for a long moment, those dark eyes missing nothing. Straight to the point. I'd always admired that about you, Ellie, even when it was directed at me. A faint smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What I want," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "is for you to understand the position you're in. The position Mark is in. And what position is that, exactly?" I challenged, though my heart was hammering. Henderson, Mark's old mentor, wasn't just creative with expenses. Julian said slowly, deliberately. He was systematically defrauding the company for years. Small amounts, cleverly hidden, but it adds up. And Mark, as his right-hand man, signed off on many of those doctored reports. Unknowingly, I'm sure. Henderson was a master manipulator. My breath hitched. This was far worse than I imagined. Mark would never knowingly be part of something like that. "I believe you," Julian said, his gaze unwavering. But the evidence, circumstantial as it might be for Mark's direct involvement, looks damning. If this were to become public, if an internal investigation were to really dig deep, well, at best, Mark's career at Sterling Corp would be over. At worst, there could be legal ramifications. I felt dizzy, the aroma of coffee suddenly cloying and heavy. Why are you telling me this? Why not just go to the board, or to Mark? Because, Julian said, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto mine, I'm offering you a way to mitigate the damage. For Mark's sake, of course. The implication hung heavy in the air. Asterisk, and for my sake, asterisk. What do you mean? I whispered, dread coiling in my stomach. Henderson kept meticulous private ledgers, a sort of diary of his deceptions. Insurance, I suppose, should he ever be caught. I have them. He let that sink in. Those ledgers detail everything, including who knew what and who was genuinely duped. They could clear Mark completely, show he was a victim, not a participant. A sliver of hope pierced through the fear. Then give them to me, or to the authorities. If they clear Mark, then what's the problem? Julian smiled then, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Ah, but it's not that simple, Eleanor. Everything has a price. Those ledgers are my leverage, my insurance. Leverage for what? I asked, my voice barely audible. What could you possibly want from me that's worth my husband's career, his reputation? He held my gaze, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something other than calculation in his eyes. Was it pain? Regret? Or just a trick of the light? I want something you took from me a long time ago, Ellie, he said softly, his voice a velvet threat. I want you to help me get it back. Or rather, help me get something I now realize I need even more. He paused, the silence stretching, filled only with the clinking of cups from the counter and the frantic beating of my own heart. I want you to convince Mark to step down from a key project. The Oakhaven development. It's vital to my long-term plans for the company, and frankly, Mark's. Conservative approach isn't what it needs. Oakhaven. Mark had been ecstatic about leading that project. It was his baby, a chance to make a real mark. To ask him to step down would crush him. You want me to sabotage my husband's biggest opportunity, so you can install someone more compliant. I want you to protect him, Julian corrected, his tone smooth as silk. A small price to pay for his career, his freedom, wouldn't you agree? Convince him. Or the Henderson ledgers find their way to the press, with select pages highlighted, of course. Mark's association with Henderson will be enough to ruin him, cleared or not eventually, the taint will remain. Your choice, Eleanor. The unspoken was clear. His version of the story, without the full context of the ledgers, would be devastating. He wasn't just blackmailing Mark. He was blackmailing me, using my loyalty to my husband as the chain. The coffee shop, once a place of sweet memories, now felt like a gilded cage. He had me, and he knew it. The depth of his ruthlessness was breathtaking. The boy I loved was well and truly gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger who wore his face. My mind reeled. This was not about some old flame's wounded pride, not entirely. This was a calculated corporate power play, and I was the unwilling pawn. Julian needed Oakhaven to go his way, and Mark, with his ethical, perhaps slower, approach, was an obstacle. Julian was using the Henderson dirt not just to threaten Mark, but to manipulate me into removing that obstacle. It was diabolical. Why me, Julian? I finally asked, my voice hoarse. Why involve me in this way? You're the CEO. You could simply reassign Mark, find some corporate excuse. A shadow crossed his face, a flicker of something I couldn't decipher. Let's just say I prefer a more elegant solution. One where Mark makes the decision himself. Less messy. And you, Eleanor, are uniquely positioned to persuade him that stepping back from Oakham is in his own best interest. Perhaps frame it as him being overstretched with his new SVP duties. You're a resourceful woman. His gaze was like a physical touch, unsettling and invasive. Besides, he added, a colder edge to his voice, this way we both get what we want. I get Oakham moving in the direction I need, and you get to keep Mark's reputation, and perhaps his innocence, intact. A fair trade, wouldn't you say? Fair? There was nothing fair about this. He was holding a gun to Mark's head and asking me to load it. And if I refuse? If I tell Mark everything? Julian chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. You think he'd believe you? Over his new dynamic CEO. He'd think you were jealous, perhaps, or trying to stir up trouble from a long-dead past. And even if he did, what then? The ledgers still exist. The story still gets out. And Mark's career is still incinerated. You'd only make it worse for him. And for yourself. Think about it, Eleanor. Really think. He leaned back again, the picture of relaxed confidence, but his eyes were like chips of ice. You have until the end of next week. That's when the preliminary Oakham strategy meeting is scheduled with the board. I expect Mark to announce his voluntary withdrawal from leading the project before then. He placed a few bills on the table for the coffee and tea. It was illuminating. Seeing you again, Ellie. He stood up, towering over me for a moment. Don't make the wrong choice. For everyone's sake. And then he was gone, leaving me sitting there, the scent of his cologne, a disturbingly familiar sandalwood, lingering in the air like a poisonous miasma. I sat there for a long time, the tea growing cold in my cup, the cheerful bustle of the daily grind, a mocking counterpoint to the turmoil inside me. He had thought of everything. The threat wasn't just to Mark's job, but to his very essence, his belief in his own integrity. Julian knew that the insinuation of wrongdoing, even if later disproven, could cripple Mark. And he knew me. He knew I would do anything to protect Mark from that kind of pain. Driving home, the city streets seemed alien, the familiar landmarks distorted by my fear and anger. Julian wasn't just a blackmailer. He was a puppet master, pulling strings I hadn't even known existed. The unexpected but consensual and deeply emotional experience the universe seemed to be thrusting upon me was turning into a nightmare. Consensual? He was giving me no real choice. Deeply emotional? Yes, a deep well of dread, fury, and a suffocating sense of betrayal. That evening, Mark was full of plans for Oakham. He spread blueprints across the dining table, his face alight with enthusiasm. Look at this, Elle. We're planning community green spaces, sustainable materials. It's going to be a flagship development, something Sterling can be truly proud of. His passion was infectious, his integrity woven into every line he drew, every idea he proposed. How could I tell him to give this up? How could I crush this bright spirit? But Julian's threat echoed in my ears. His career is still incinerated. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I felt like I was living a double existence. On the surface, I was the supportive wife, listening to Mark's Oakham updates, managing our home, walking Leo. Inside, I was a prisoner of Julian's ultimatum, wrestling with an impossible dilemma. Sleep offered no escape, my dreams filled with shadowy figures and collapsing buildings. I examined every option. Could I go to the police? What proof did I have? Julian's word against mine. The ledgers. He controlled them. Could I find some dirt on Julian? The thought felt sordid, and likely fruitless. He was too careful, too smart. I found myself thinking about Julian, the boy I knew, trying to reconcile him with the man who now threatened my world. Had the seeds of this ruthlessness always been there, hidden beneath the charm and intensity? Or had life, his relentless pursuit of success, twisted him into this shape? There were moments, fleeting images from our past, a shared laugh, a moment of vulnerability he'd once shown me, that made this current reality even more painful. It wasn't just a stranger doing this. It was someone who had once known my heart. One afternoon, I drove past Sterling Corp's towering glass and steel headquarters. Julian was in there, probably in a sprawling office with a panoramic view, making decisions that affected thousands, casually destroying lives with the stroke of a pen or a whispered command. Anger, sharp and hot, surged through me. How dare he? How dare he use our past, our shared intimacy, as a tool for his corporate machinations? The deadline loomed, a black cloud on the horizon. I knew I couldn't let Mark be destroyed. But the thought of manipulating him, of betraying his trust by convincing him to abandon Oakhaven, made me feel physically ill. There had to be another way. But what? I decided I needed to see Julian again. Not at his office, not on his terms. I needed to understand why. Was this really just about a project? Or was there something deeper, something more personal driving him? Perhaps if I could understand his motives, I could find a weakness, a chink in his armor. It was a slim hope, but it was all I had. The alternative, succumbing to his blackmail, was a slow poison I wasn't sure I could administer to Mark or swallow myself. The meeting at the Daily Grind had been a declaration of war. My next move had to be more than just surrender. It had to be a counter-offensive, however small. I just didn't know what ammunition I possessed. The weight of Julian's ultimatum pressed down on me, suffocating. Each day, Mark would talk about Oakhaven, his eyes shining with a passion I hadn't seen in years. He was sketching out ideas for eco-friendly housing, community gardens, even a small amphitheater for local performances. It was more than a project for him. It was a legacy, a chance to build something truly meaningful. And Julian wanted me to tell him to walk away from it, to extinguish that light. The thought was a constant ache in my chest. I knew I couldn't directly refuse Julian. The risk to Mark was too great. The Henderson ledgers were a ticking time bomb. But I also couldn't bring myself to manipulate Mark as Julian demanded. There had to be another path, a way to navigate this treacherous landscape without sacrificing my husband or my own integrity. I decided my only option was to confront Julian again, but this time I needed to shift the ground. I wouldn't be the scared, cornered woman from the Daily Grind. I needed to appeal to something beyond his corporate ambition, if such a thing still existed within him. A long shot, I knew, but what else was there? I found out from Mark, inadvertently, that Julian often worked late, usually alone, on Thursdays. He mentioned it casually. Julian's a machine. Stays till 9 or 10 every Thursday, reviewing everything himself. This Thursday was the day before Julian's deadline for me to convince Mark. It was my last chance. That evening, I told Mark I was meeting an old school friend for a late dinner. The lie felt heavy, another small betrayal, but necessary. My heart hammered as I drove towards the imposing Sterling Corp building. The city lights blurred past, streaks of color in the rain-slicked streets. The building itself was mostly dark, a silent monolith, but the top floors, where the executive suites were, blazed with light. Julian's kingdom. I managed to get past the evening security guard with a plausible story about dropping off urgent documents for Mr. Vance that his secretary had forgotten. The guard, thankfully, was more interested in his late-night sandwich than in rigorous security checks for a middle-aged woman who looked harmless enough. The elevator ride to the CEO's floor was eerily silent. The doors opened onto a hushed, opulent reception area. It was deserted. Julian's office was at the end of a long corridor, the only one with light spilling from under the door. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my blouse, and walked towards it. The door was slightly ajar. I could hear the faint click of a keyboard. I pushed it open gently. Julian was at his massive desk, his back to me, silhouetted against the glittering cityscape. The room was vast, impersonal, all sleek lines and modern art. It felt cold, like him. "Julian?" I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He swiveled around in his chair, surprise momentarily widening his eyes before his usual guarded expression clicked into place. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? How did you get up? Does it matter?" I walked further into the room, stopping a few feet from his desk. "We need to talk. Properly." He leaned back, observing me. "I thought our last conversation was quite clear. The deadline is tomorrow." "I'm not here to tell you I've convinced Mark," I said. "Because I haven't, and I won't." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "That's a dangerous game you're playing, Eleanor. You know the stakes." "I do," I affirmed, my gaze locking with his. "But I also know you, Julian. Or at least I knew a version of you. The version that wouldn't stoop to destroying an innocent man for a business deal. The version that understood loyalty, and perhaps even regret." He scoffed, a harsh sound in the quiet room. "Loyalty? You're talking to me about loyalty? What about your loyalty to Mark when you kept our past a secret from him?" "Our past is just that. Past," I retorted, though his words stung. "It has nothing to do with Mark's competence or integrity. This Oakoven project, it means the world to him. He's pouring his heart into it, envisioning something truly special. And you want to crush that, not because he's incapable, but because he's not your yes man." Julian stood up, walking around the desk to stand nearer the window, his profile sharp against the lights. "Business is about results, Eleanor, not sentiment. Mark's vision, however heartfelt, is too slow, too cautious for what Sterling needs right now. Oakoven needs to be aggressive, profitable, a statement. His approach is quaint." "Quaint?" I echoed, incredulous. "He's talking about building a community, responsibly. Is that quaint to you now, as ambition blinded you so completely?" I took a step closer. "What happened to you, Julian? The boy I knew wanted to build things too, but not on the wreckage of other people's lives." He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something raw in his eyes, something that wasn't cold calculation. "That boy is long gone, Eleanor. Life has a way of beating idealism out of you. You learn to make hard choices. You learn that to get to the top, you can't afford to be sentimental." "But at what cost?" I pressed, my voice softer now, more pleading than accusatory. "Look at this office, Julian. You're at the top. You have everything. Why do this? Why hurt Mark? Why hurt me in this way? There has to be more to it than just Oakoven." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, fixed on some point beyond the city lights. The air between us crackled with unspoken history, with years of resentment and perhaps buried pain. Then he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "He has you, Eleanor." I blinked, taken aback. "What?" "Mark," Julian clarified, his eyes returning to mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It looked like a profound, aching loneliness. "He has you. He has the life we talked about. A home, stability, love." He said the last word as if it were a foreign object on his tongue. "When I left for Singapore, I told myself it was for us. that I'd build this great career, and then we'd have everything. But I got caught up in it, the ambition, the drive. I lost sight of what mattered. And I lost you. The confession hung in the air, stunning me into silence. This wasn't about Oakhven, not really. Or at least, not entirely. This was about us. About the past. About his regrets. The blackmail, the threats. They were a twisted, desperate attempt to reclaim something, to exert control over a narrative that had slipped from his grasp decades ago. Julian, I began, my voice gentle. That was a lifetime ago. We were children. We made choices, and life moved on. Did it? He countered, a bitter edge to his tone. Or did it just leave some of us behind, watching others live the lives we fumbled? He gestured vaguely around the opulent office. This is success, Eleanor. It's what I chased. And it's empty. It's meetings and bottom lines and deals. There's no warmth here. Suddenly, the powerful CEO, the ruthless blackmailer, seemed smaller, more human. Vulnerable. It was an unexpected shift, a crack in the carefully constructed facade. This was the unexpected but deeply emotional experience I hadn't foreseen. He wasn't just a villain. He was a man haunted by his own choices. So, this is revenge? I asked quietly. Making Mark suffer because you regret your past? No, not revenge, he said, shaking his head slowly. Maybe it was a test. To see if I could still affect your life. To see if there was anything left of what we had, even if it was just anger. He looked at me then, a raw honesty in his eyes that stripped away years of pretense. When I saw you at that dinner, Ellie, so much came flooding back. And then I saw you with Mark, saw how happy you were, how settled. It was like a punch to the gut. The atmosphere in the room had changed. The tension was still there, but it was different now, shot through with a shared sorrow, a poignant acknowledgement of what was and what could never be. The blackmail was still a sword hanging over Mark's head, but the hand wielding it seemed less steady. Julian, I said, choosing my words carefully, what you're doing to Mark is wrong. It's based on your pain, not his actions. Those ledgers. If they truly show Henderson was the sole perpetrator, then they should be used to clear Mark, not to coerce him or me. He looked away towards the city again. And Oakhven. Oakhven should be decided on its merits, by what's best for the company and the community, not by your personal agenda or Mark's forced withdrawal, I stated. If you believe Mark's approach is wrong, then challenge him professionally. Debate him. Don't destroy him behind his back using me as your weapon. He was quiet for a long time, the only sound the hum of the building's climate control. I watched him, waiting, my own emotions a tangled mess of old affection, present anger, and a surprising flicker of empathy for the lonely man standing before me. This was it. The moment where he chose what kind of man he truly was. The ruthless CEO, or someone capable of redemption, of respect. Finally, he turned back to me, his expression weary but resolute. You always did have a way of cutting through the bull, Ellie. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. You're right. This whole thing with the ledgers with Oakhven, it got twisted. It became about more than business. He walked back to his desk and picked up a thick, old-fashioned ledger. Henderson's, I presumed. He held it for a moment, then extended it to me. Here, he said. These are the originals. They show Henderson's methods, his accounts, and they demonstrate, quite clearly, that Mark was unaware. He was diligent, yes, but Henderson was clever at concealing the true nature of his transactions from those he didn't want involved in the scheme directly. I stared at the ledger, then at him. "You're giving this to me? Just like that?" "Not just like that," Julian said, his voice regaining some of its usual firmness, but without the earlier menace. "I'll handle the Henderson situation internally. There will be an investigation, but it will be discreet, focused on recovering what we can and ensuring our internal controls are strengthened. Mark's name, if it comes up, will be cleared by what's in here. His career won't be damaged by Henderson's deceit." "And Oakoven?" I asked, hardly daring to breathe. He sighed. "I still have concerns about Mark's timeline and budget projections for Oakoven. I'll raise them with him directly, professionally. We'll debate it. If his plan is sound, if he can defend it robustly against my challenges, then he can lead it. If not, we find a compromise or a different leader. But it will be a business decision, Eleanor, not this." He gestured vaguely between us, encompassing the blackmail, the pain. I took the ledger, its weight surprising. It felt like a physical manifestation of the burden that was being lifted from my shoulders. "Thank you, Julian," I said, my voice thick with emotion. It was more than just about Mark. It was about him choosing a better path, about a flicker of the man I once knew re-emerging. "Don't thank me yet," he said, a wry twist to his lips. "I'm still a demanding CEO. Mark will have to prove himself on Oakoven. And as for us," he paused, a complex emotion in his eyes. "There's too much water under that bridge, isn't there? Too many years, too many regrets." "Yes," I agreed softly. "There are." I saw a deep sadness in him then, a profound understanding of roads not taken. The connection between us was still there, not romantic, not anymore, but something elemental, a recognition of shared history, shared humanity, even shared mistakes. It was an unexpected, consensual moment of emotional honesty, forged in the crucible of a terrible situation. Consensual because we had both chosen, finally, to lay down our weapons and speak truth. "You should go, Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle. "It's late." I nodded, clutching the ledger. "Julian, for what it's worth, I hope you find some warmth in your life. Everyone deserves that." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You too, Eleanor. You always deserved the best." As I walked out of his office, out of the silent, imposing building and into the cool night air, I felt a profound sense of release. The city lights seemed brighter, clearer. The blackmail was over. Mark was safe. But more than that, something had shifted within me, and perhaps within Julian too. I had faced down a ghost from my past, not by fighting him with his own weapons, but by appealing to a shared humanity I wasn't even sure existed anymore. It was a victory, not just over a threat, but for a kind of quiet integrity. Driving home, I knew I had a difficult conversation ahead of me with Mark, not about Julian's initial threats, perhaps some truths were too damaging, but about the Henderson situation, about the ledgers Julian had given me, and about the need for transparency. I wouldn't mention Julian's confession of regret or his loneliness. That was his burden to carry, his story to tell, if he ever chose to. My priority was Mark, our marriage, and our future. The next morning, I sat down with Mark before he left for work, the Henderson ledger on the kitchen table between us. I explained, carefully, that Julian had uncovered serious fraud committed by Henderson, and that these ledgers proved Mark's innocence, but also highlighted how close he had come to being implicated. I didn't mention the blackmail regarding Oakoven, framing Julian's initial approach as a deeply concerned, if overly aggressive, new CEO trying to understand potential liabilities. I told him Julian had given me the ledger as a way to ensure Mark understood the seriousness of the past issues and could protect himself. Mark was shocked, then angry at Henderson's betrayal, and finally immensely relieved. He looked at the ledger, then at me. "So, Julian Vance, he gave this to you? To help me?" There was a note of surprise in his voice. "He said he wants what's best for the company, and that includes protecting innocent people," I replied, which was, in its own way, the truth Julian had finally arrived at. "He'd also said he'll be challenging you on Oakhven, Mark. Hard. He expects you to defend your vision." Mark's jaw tightened, but then a determined glint appeared in his eyes. "Let him. My plan is solid. I can defend it." He looked at me, his expression softening. "Thank you, Elle, for whatever you did to get this. You always look out for me." He didn't press for details about my meeting with Julian, perhaps sensing there was more to it, but trusting my judgment. Our bond, I realized, was stronger than Julian's manipulations, stronger than past secrets. In the weeks that followed, things at Sterling Corp did change. Julian, true to his word, initiated a discreet internal review of Henderson's tenure. Mark, armed with the knowledge from the ledger and a renewed sense of purpose, faced Julian's challenges on the Oakhven project head-on. Their debates were apparently intense, rigorous, but ultimately respectful. Mark told me with a touch of surprise that Julian, while demanding, was also fair, pushing him to refine his plans to make them stronger. In the end, Mark's vision for Oakhven, somewhat modified but essentially intact, was approved. I never saw Julian privately again. We'd not exchange polite greetings at the occasional company function Mark insisted I attend. There was a new distance between us, but it wasn't the cold, hostile distance of before. It was a space of acknowledged history, of a crisis navigated, and in its own complex way, resolved. I sometimes caught him looking at me, a fleeting expression in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or just the quiet acknowledgement of a path irrevocably diverged. My life with Mark settled back into its comfortable rhythm, but something had changed within me. I had faced a profound threat to our happiness and found a strength I didn't know I possessed. I had looked into the abyss of someone else's pain and ambition and had not fallen in. There was a quiet confidence in me now, a deeper appreciation for the simple, honest love Mark and I shared. The unexpected experience had been a harrowing journey through fear and manipulation, but it had also led to an unexpected moment of raw emotional honesty, a connection that transcended the ugliness. It taught me that even in the darkest of situations, appealing to the sliver of humanity that might still exist in someone can be more powerful than succumbing to fear or resorting to retaliation. The story of my husband's boss being my ex and his attempt to blackmail me wasn't something I'd ever share publicly, certainly not on a YouTube video with that kind of title. But the emotional core of it, the journey of facing a past that threatened my present, of finding an unexpected resolution through courage, and a difficult, honest connection, that was a story of personal growth. It was a reminder that people are complex, that past loves can cast long shadows, and that even in the face of profound betrayal, there can be space for understanding, if not forgiveness. And that, I realized, was a story worth reflecting on, a quiet chapter in my own life that had, against all odds, ended not in disaster, but in a deeper sense of peace and self-awareness. Leo nudged my hand with his wet nose, bringing me back to the present, to the warm lamplight of our living room, to the steady, reassuring presence of Mark reading in his armchair. And I smiled. We were okay. I was okay.